And I've auditioned for a lot and haven't got a lot. And then Gran Torino came around where he was talking to me. It was like this little role.
Scott Eastwood's story is one of struggle, rejection, and eventually finding his own path despite being the son of one of Hollywood's biggest legends. His journey shows how even having a famous father doesn't guarantee success, and sometimes it can make things much harder. Early life and hidden identity. Scott Clinton Reeves was born on March 21, 1986 in Monterey, California. His birth wasn't celebrated in newspapers or announced to the world. In fact, his own father, Clint Eastwood, didn't even publicly acknowledge that Scott existed. At the time, Clint was already a major movie star, directing and acting in hit films like Pale Rider. But while Clint stood on red carpets and received awards, Scott's life began quietly, hidden from public view. Scott's mother, Jocelyn Reeves, worked as a flight attendant. She had met Clint during one of his trips in the mid-1980s, and they began a secret relationship that lasted about 3 years. During this time, Clint was publicly dating actress Sondra Locke, who had no idea he was living a double life. She only found out about Scott and his younger sister Catherine years later during a bitter legal battle. When Scott was born, his birth certificate listed him as Scott Clinton Reeves, not Eastwood. This was done to keep the affair secret. Catherine was born 2 years later in 1988. By then, the secret had gone on so long that the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. But Clint still didn't acknowledge them publicly, and he certainly didn't help raise them. Scott spent his early years in Carmel by the Sea, a small town where Clint had once served as mayor. But Scott didn't live like a celebrity's child. While his father was making $15 million per movie during the 1990s, Scott's world looked very different. When Scott turned 10, Jocelyn moved the family to Hawaii. This wasn't just a change of location. It was an attempt to put sands of miles between Scott and the Eastwood spotlight. In Hawaii, Scott lived a normal life in modest surroundings. His classmates had no idea who his father was, and Clint mostly stayed out of sight and out of reach. While Clint was building his fortune with blockbuster movies and buying new properties, Scott got by on his mother's flight attendant salary. As a teenager, Scott worked construction jobs and waited tables to earn money. College years and early struggles. When Scott went to Loyola Marymount University, he didn't have help from a trust fund. He paid his own way through college while studying communications. Even during his college years, he took acting classes and auditioned for small parts, still using his birth name, Scott Reeves. He didn't want special treatment or help from his father, but the rejection came anyway. Scott later admitted that he auditioned for almost every one of his father's films and was turned down each time. Clint refused to help him get roles. Even when Clint directed American Sniper, a film that made more than $547 million and earned 6 Oscar nominations, Scott didn't get called for a part. He wanted just one chance, but he didn't get it. Clint's philosophy was simple. No handouts, no favors. You earn everything yourself. While this might sound admirable, for Scott it meant years of working in low-budget films, parking cars, and building houses while his father won Academy Awards. Scott's earliest roles were almost invisible. In Flags of Our Fathers, directed by Clint in 2006, Scott had a tiny role as Private Roberto Lunsford. He was credited under the name Scott Reeves, and no one knew he was Clint's son. The cost of hiding his identity was high. Scott missed out on attention, headlines, and career momentum. In films like Pride and Player 5150, he was lost in the credits. These weren't just independent films. Some went straight to video, and others barely played in theaters. Scott was stuck in professional limbo, working hard but getting nowhere. Family complications. Scott's family situation made things even more complicated. Clint Eastwood had 8 children with 6 different women, and Scott was just one piece of that puzzle. His half-siblings included Lori, born in 1954 and given up for adoption, Kimber, born in 1964, Kyle and Allison from Clint's marriage to Maggie Johnson, Francesca, born in 1993, and Morgan, born in 1996. Some of these children grew up wealthy, while others like Scott and Catherine did not. Many didn't meet each other until they were adults, making family gatherings awkward and filled with tension. During his teenage years in Hawaii, Scott struggled with anger issues. He acted out at school, got suspended for fighting, and had what he later called serious anger problems. He knew who his father was but couldn't talk about it openly. He couldn't ask why Clint was absent or explain to anyone why he felt both important and invisible at the same time. When the family returned to California in 2000, Scott enrolled at Carmel High School. Slowly, the truth about his parentage began to leak out. Some classmates treated him like royalty because of his famous father, while others mocked him. Scott even considered keeping the name Reeves forever, just to escape the constant comparisons to Clint. Breaking through and personal tragedy. By college, Scott was done hiding his identity, but he still refused to use Clint's influence. He applied for financial aid, worked long hours, and auditioned for roles that paid almost nothing. Then things began to change. In 2009, Scott landed a role in Invictus, another Clint Eastwood film. This time, Scott used his real last name for the first time. The film was about proving yourself under pressure and fighting to be taken seriously, exactly what Scott was doing in real life. In 2012, at age 26, Scott took a big risk by signing a contract for 3 horror films, starting with Texas Chainsaw 3D. He was still relatively unknown and hadn't even seen the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, but the role helped him gain experience and recognition in the industry. The real breakthrough came in 2014 when Scott joined Fury, a gritty World War II film starring Brad Pitt. Scott played Sergeant Miles, the tank crew's newest soldier. This wasn't just a minor role. Scott had to go through intense military training and operate real Sherman tanks from the 1940s. The cast won the National Board of Review's Best Ensemble Award, meaning Scott was now being recognized alongside Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, and Jon Bernthal. For the first time, critics started calling him a real actor, not just Clint's son. However, 2014 also brought devastating personal tragedy. Scott's girlfriend, Jewel Brangman, died in a car accident. She was only 26 years old. The crash wasn't serious. It was the kind of accident most people walk away from. But Jewel didn't survive because of a deadly flaw in her rental car. Jewel was driving from San Diego to Los Angeles in a 2001 Honda Civic when she lightly rear-ended another vehicle in a small chain reaction crash. No one else had serious injuries, but Jewel's car had a dangerous secret. The airbag had been recalled in 2009, but the rental company never fixed it. When the airbag deployed, it didn't save her life. It killed her. The chemicals inside had become unstable, and the metal canister exploded, sending shrapnel through her neck and splitting her spine. The airbag came from Takata, whose defective airbags were found in 24 million cars across the United States, leading to the biggest automotive recall in American history. But for Jewel, the recall came too late. Scott kept this tragedy secret for almost 3 years. He never talked about it publicly, and he didn't even reach out to Jewel's father, who was desperate for answers about his only child's death. Career growth and personal healing. Despite his grief, Scott continued building his acting career. In 2015, he starred in The Longest Ride, a Nicholas Sparks romance where he played a bull rider. Scott did his own bull riding stunts, showing his commitment to authentic performances. He even got nominated for Choice Movie Breakout Star that year. Later in 2015, Scott made a surprising decision that worried many people in the industry. He appeared as the lead romantic interest in Taylor Swift's Wildest Dreams music video. Industry professionals warned him that this might hurt his credibility as a serious actor, but Scott went ahead anyway. The video was launched during the MTV VMAs pre-show and got millions of views within hours. All proceeds went to wild animal conservation, showing Scott's commitment to meaningful causes. In 2017, Scott finally opened up about Jewel's death in an interview with GQ Australia. He admitted that losing her had changed him completely. He said it made dating harder and made it difficult to trust people. He had never faced the loss of a romantic partner before, and the experience left him feeling broken. Scott also revealed his shame about never reaching out to Jewel's father, saying he still hadn't found the right words, even 3 years later, finding strength through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. One thing that helped Scott cope with his emotional struggles was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which he learned from his friend Paul Walker. Walker, the Fast and Furious star, introduced Scott to the sport around 2007. For Paul, Jiu-Jitsu wasn't just exercise, it was a way of life. He trained under top instructors and even turned parts of his Hawaii home into a training center. Paul was already a brown belt when he died in 2013. 2 weeks after his death, his instructors awarded him a black belt posthumously. Scott took Paul's gift seriously and embraced jiu-jitsu as more than just physical training. He said it taught him how to control his ego, stay humble, and manage both physical and emotional pain. "You'll choke some people out, and some will choke you out, no matter who you are," Scott explained. The lesson was simple. No fame, muscles, or Hollywood last name could protect you on the mat. You had to earn every achievement. For someone like Scott, who grew up in Clint Eastwood's shadow, this was essential. He needed something that stripped away all expectations and made him prove himself based purely on effort and skill. After Jewel's death, jiu-jitsu became even more important to Scott. It wasn't just exercise anymore, it became therapy. Scott said it helped him stay grounded and gave him the strength to keep going. He practiced regularly and showed up even when he didn't want to, and that discipline gave him mental strength as well as physical fitness. Major film roles and career success. Scott's career took a major leap forward in 2017 when he joined the Fast and the Furious franchise, one of the biggest movie series in the world. He played a government agent called Little Nobody, a role written to help fill the void left by Paul Walker's death. Scott didn't try to copy Paul's character. Instead, he brought his own charm, wit, and strength to the role. The character had the same sense of honor, loved fast cars, and clashed with the crew just enough to earn their respect. With the franchise having already earned over $6 billion worldwide, Scott's role gave him instant global recognition. He wasn't just making a cameo appearance, he played an important part in tracking down the villain Cypher, proving he could handle big action scenes and work alongside major stars. In 2018, Scott took on an even bigger challenge by co-leading Pacific Rim Uprising. The movie featured giant robots, monsters, and massive explosions, with Scott right in the middle of it. F all the action. Though critics weren't impressed, the film still earned $291 million worldwide. Scott handled the green screens, computer-generated imagery, and physical stunts without any problems, proving he could carry a global blockbuster. Then in 2019, Scott switched to a completely different type of film with The Outpost. This wasn't a loud, flashy action movie. It was raw, intense, and painfully realistic. Scott played a soldier trapped in one of the most dangerous battles of the Afghanistan War. The film wasn't a heroic fantasy, but instead showed the messy, terrifying, and emotional reality of combat. Critics loved The Outpost, giving it a 93% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Veterans said the film felt authentic and realistic. One critic even noted that Scott sounded exactly like a young Clint Eastwood when he delivered the line, "No, not today." This time, Scott didn't just prove he could handle action scenes, he proved he could really act with depth and emotion. Business ventures and future projects. While building his acting career, Scott also started a business venture called Made Here with entrepreneur Dane Chapin in 2019. This wasn't just another celebrity clothing brand. It was a patriotic mission. Scott believed that American-made should still mean something important. Their company started with basic items like t-shirts, socks, and boxers, all made in United States factories rather than being outsourced to cheaper overseas manufacturers. Scott wasn't just a spokesperson for the brand. He and Chapin were hands-on with every detail, down to the fit of each shirt. The idea was simple but bold. Make everyday essentials with high quality while telling the story of the American workers who made them. Each product was a symbol and proof that American manufacturing wasn't dead. It just needed people willing to believe in it again. The brand soft launched in September 2019, but behind the scenes, the work was difficult. They had to redesign products, improve materials, and find suppliers who shared their vision. Most similar products were usually made overseas, but Scott was determined to prove they could do it better at home. The brand wasn't about chasing fashion trends, it was about pride in American craftsmanship. Scott has several major film projects coming up. Regretting You, based on a best-selling Colleen Hoover novel, is set to be released in theaters on October 24, 2025. The cast includes Allison Williams, Dave Franco, and McKenna Grace. The story deals with emotional themes as a car accident destroys a family and reveals decades of secrets. With Hoover herself serving as executive producer, Scott knows the potential power of the Hoover fanbase. In Stolen Girl, Scott plays Robson, a man who helps track down a missing child taken to the Middle East. The film is based on the true story of Maureen Dabick, with Kate Beckinsale playing the mother. The movie was shot in Italy and explores themes of international betrayal, war zones, and parental love that never gives up. Relationship with Clint Eastwood. Despite all the early struggles and rejections, Scott's relationship with his father has evolved over the years. One of the most intense moments between them happened when Scott was 16 years old. He made a serious mistake by taking his 14-year-old sister to a party and leaving her there alone. When Clint found out, he didn't just lecture Scott. He grabbed him, slammed him against a wall, and punched him in the face. Clint grabbed Scott by the throat and said just one thing: "You don't ever leave your sister at a party. Ever." That violent lesson stayed with Scott forever. Clint came from a different generation that believed in tough love and harsh consequences. Scott later said his father didn't believe in New Age parenting. In their house, if you did something wrong, you got punished immediately. When Scott asked for $8,000 to buy a truck, Clint simply said no. Scott had a job and was earning money, so Clint believed that should be enough. Scott had to figure out the rest himself. But Clint's tough approach also taught Scott valuable lessons. Scott says his father taught him how to show up on time, work hard, and take life seriously. That's where Scott's strong work ethic came from. If he wanted something, he had to earn it himself. One of the biggest career decisions Scott faced came in 2022, when Warner Brothers offered him a 3-picture deal that included a role in The Suicide Squad. It was the kind of offer most actors dream about, with big money and major exposure. But Scott didn't feel good about the contract. He told his father, "They don't want to pay me real money, and there's no script for the next film." Clint didn't try to pressure Scott in either direction. He simply said, "If it feels right, do it. If not, don't." That was it. No big speech, just trust your instincts. Scott walked away from the deal, showing that Clint had become more of a mentor than just a demanding father. He taught Scott that career choices should be based on respect and gut feelings, not just fame or money. Current challenges and future goals. Now that Clint is 94 years old, Scott knows he's one of the last living legends of old Hollywood. Scott tries to get as many stories out of his father as possible. Sometimes Clint shares wild stories about Frank Sinatra or old movie sets, stories that seem like they belong in a museum. Since Clint doesn't tell these stories often, Scott listens carefully whenever he does. Scott remembers being on the set of Space Cowboys as a child and flying in a helicopter with Clint up the California coast. Sometimes Clint would even let Scott hold the controls. These weren't just cool experiences. They showed Scott the kind of man his father really was: focused, fearless, and completely in control of his world. Despite his success, Scott has been honest about the emotional toll of working in Hollywood. In a 2022 interview, he said the industry had burned him repeatedly. By age 35, he was questioning whether he wanted to continue acting into his 40s. His early years in Los Angeles and San Diego were anything but glamorous. He juggled jobs in construction, bartending, and parking cars just to survive, making only $30,000 to $40,000 per year. Shockingly, he earned more money mixing drinks than acting. There were moments when Scott seriously considered quitting acting entirely. He even thought about becoming a firefighter as a real backup plan. The emotional stress of constantly chasing roles, combined with the unpredictable nature of the entertainment business, weighed heavily on him. Now approaching his late 30s, Scott is thinking about more than just movies. He doesn't have a family yet, but he wants one, and he's worried about what that life would look like. The idea of being away from his children all the time just to keep working in an unstable business concerns him deeply. Scott Eastwood's story shows that having a famous parent doesn't guarantee success. Sometimes it makes the journey much harder. Through years of rejection, personal tragedy, and industry struggles, Scott has carved out his own identity separate from his father's shadow. His commitment to authentic performances, American manufacturing, and personal growth through martial arts demonstrates that he's built more than just an acting career. He's built character and resilience that will serve him well, whatever path he chooses next.